I'd like to welcome you all. Today my name's Kim Turner, and I'm delighted to see you here for our first event in a new series at Cities of Migration called Immigrant Futures, that looks at good ideas, new ideas, and time-tested ideas about what it takes to realize the contribution of skill, talent, and experience that immigration unlocks for our increasingly urban communities. Today's session, Designing a Welcoming Economy, takes a look at immigration through a local economic development lens. For many small and mid-sized cities, old regional cities, rural hubs, aging Rust Belt cities, and manufacturing towns facing economic decline, making the connection between immigration and economic development has the potential to offset population loss, address gaps and shifts in the labor market, and generally secure a brighter future for their communities, as well as a greater or more equitable share of the nation's social and economic capital. So what does a welcoming economy look like? What does that mean? Research suggests that newcomer-friendly services and slogans aren't enough. Immigrant retention depends on positive labor force market experiences and a robust local economy. So what can local councils do to attract and retain immigrant investment in the future health, wealth, and well-being of their cities and regions? This morning, to help us answer these important questions, we're delighted to have a brilliant panel of speakers joining us from the US and from across Canada. But I'd like to start with our first speaker, who joins us all the way from St. Louis, Missouri. Welcome to our icy city, Christina Pope. Christina is Network Director at Welcoming America and Project Lead with Global Detroit of the Welcoming Economies Global Network. We Global, as they call it, was developed in response to the ravages of population decline, industrial change, and the 2007-8 financial crisis. Originally focused on strategies for economic revitalization in Detroit, based on immigration and global connections. It wasn't long before Rust Belt cities right across the Midwest were linking up and then tapping into the expertise developed by Welcoming America to make cities both immigrant-friendly and immigrant-competent. So to tell us more about designing a welcoming economy, here's Christina Pope. Welcome.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Kim, and I should use the mic, yes? Wonderful. Well, thank you for the invitation, and to our host and our co-panelists for what I know will be a really rich discussion today. We have a wonderful, exciting opportunity to exchange learning and further develop models for local welcoming economies today, so thank you for joining us. I'm the Network Director at Welcoming America, and Welcoming America provides the roadmap and support for localities that are becoming more inclusive towards immigrants and all residents. Our Welcoming Network encompasses cities as diverse as Anchorage, Alaska, Atlanta, Georgia, where our headquarters is, and St. Louis, Missouri, where I'm based. And our growing international efforts provide an opportunity to exchange best practices between global inclusive cities. As part of our mission to connect local welcoming champions, Welcoming America runs the Welcoming Economies Global Network, as Kim said, or We Global, in partnership with the organization Global Detroit. So today I'll be speaking about some of the models for Welcoming Economies efforts that have come out of We Global Network cities and how cities in the U.S. are proactively planning for a welcoming economy. The story of We Global begins with our good friends at Global Detroit and their peers across the Midwestern United States. Global Detroit is a regional economic development engine that leverages the talent, ingenuity, entrepreneurial spirit, and determination of immigrants in Metro Detroit to power the regional economy. Several years ago, Global Detroit started to run into similar initiatives at conferences and events across the nation. And they found a whole host of organizations that were seeing immigration as an economic development strategy in response to population decline, industrial change, and the 2008 financial crisis. These organizations found that they were working on similar strategies: workforce development, entrepreneurship, home ownership, urban agriculture, and international student retention. And they were working in similar contexts: newer gateways for immigration and immigrant populations lower than the national average but rapidly growing in regional economies that needed to tap into the contributions of all residents in order to grow. So finding a similar mission and having formed strong working relationships, they joined together as a network focused on peer-to-peer learning, technical assistance, communications, and strategic partnerships. The network formalized, and Welcoming America joined as a lead partner in what has become a powerful movement to advance inclusive economic development across sectors. Several years later, the network has expanded to include 40 members, and members of the network have pioneered many of the welcoming economy strategies that are being replicated not just in the Midwest, but across the United States. While immigration policy at the federal level in the United States impacts local organizations' ability to build a welcoming economy, members of the We Global Network and other immigrant economic development initiatives are going strong, employing several of the strategies that I just mentioned. So I'll focus on two just now: entrepreneurship and international student retention, to give you a sense of what these welcoming economies models look like on the ground. There's a strong case for supporting immigrant entrepreneurs as a win-win regional economic development strategy. And I won't belabor the data here, but I will go over a couple of points because I think this audience is familiar with some of the case making. We know that in the United States, immigrants power our main streets. While immigrants are 13% of the overall population, they are 18% of business owners and 28% of Main Street business owners. And Main Street businesses meaning dry cleaners, grocery stores, restaurants, and more, the businesses that you go to every day. At the same time, immigrant founders also play an outsized role in high-tech startups. And they're 42% of Fortune 500 companies, and in the Rust Belt, they're 46% of those companies. Given the important role that immigrants play in starting new businesses, entrepreneurship shows up in almost every welcoming economy planning effort that we see in the United States. Most We Global members focus on helping immigrant entrepreneurs access the same kind of supports that help other entrepreneurs, but they do it in a way that addresses language access and cultural competence. So these are really the keys in tweaking those programs. I want to share with you the model from the Neighborhood Development Center of Minneapolis-St. Paul, which is a model that has been replicated or is being replicated in several cities, including Detroit, Syracuse, Philadelphia, Wilmington, Anchorage, and St. Cloud. And of those, St. Cloud is the smallest. Their model includes business planning training, ongoing technical assistance, microloans, and other supports in multiple languages. These services are offered in immigrants' neighborhoods at venues that are accessible and trusted. NDC at this point has trained nearly 5,000 entrepreneurs, and 85% of those are people of color. They've lent $13.7 million to 570 businesses in character-based loans. And there are now 550 entrepreneurs that are in business providing over 2,000 jobs, and 82% of those jobs are from the surrounding neighborhood and 78% filled by people of color. Importantly, while immigrants are a target population of NDC's programming, so too are low-income residents of all backgrounds. Their model not only supports entrepreneurs of all types, but also transforms neighborhoods by revitalizing vacant property and creating jobs. So it's really a whole of community or whole of neighborhood strategy. While NDC is the comprehensive model for inclusive entrepreneurship that includes immigrants, institutions can take first-order steps, such as talking to entrepreneurship programs and listening to businesses, and from there, determine what the right size approach is for the community. And that might be a mentorship program or connecting entrepreneurs to opportunities to acquire capital. So while many organizations are building towards the comprehensive model that NDC has, there are many first-order smaller steps that other communities are taking. Another area of work for many We Global and Welcoming Network members is the retention of international university students, particularly in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM. International students predominate STEM degrees in the United States. You'll see, for example, that they make up 70% of the students enrolled in master's or PhD programs in electrical engineering. So 70%, that's the vast majority of those students. And more international students are staying to work after graduation. Of those who take advantage of the opportunity to work short-term in the United States after graduation, which is a temporary work authorization situation, 49% are STEM graduates, so almost 50% of those students that are staying after graduation are in the STEM fields. And meanwhile, U.S. economies face a skills gap in high-skill positions in the STEM fields. International students are one hugely important source of the talent that regional economies need to grow and attract business in filling these unfilled positions. International student retention programs engage employers, employer groups, and universities' international student offices. In St. Louis, the St. Louis Mosaic Project convenes a quarterly meeting of universities to discuss best practices. They've been doing this for about 3 years now. The meetings create friendly competition between universities who want to help their students achieve their career goals. So in coming together, they're hearing from one another, and they know they'll need to report back in a quarter about the progress that they've made and be able to compare and contrast what they've been able to achieve. In Michigan, to retain international students, the Global Talent Retention Initiative works with both students and employers. On one end, GTRI helps international students navigate visa regulations, job searches, and cultural differences on the pathway to employment in Michigan. On the other, GTRI cultivates relationships with Michigan employers to dispel myths about hiring international students and spread awareness of the competitive advantage of hiring them. And if you talk to We Global Network members, they'll tell you that international student retention is really a hard nut to crack, and that while they're experimenting with different strategies, we do end up bumping up against federal immigration regulations and the constraints of those, as well as some of the challenges that employers face in dealing with short-term work authorization and some of the uncertainties of applying for longer-term work authorization. So again, taking a right-size approach and starting small to build partnerships and credibility is key. For example, one lighter lift model that organizations have had success with is employer meet and greets at local companies. For this kind of event, a company may open its offices for a tour, networking time with employees, or a chance to ask questions with human resources staff. And this provides sort of a low-risk, comfortable environment for international students to interact with a company, interact with U.S. business environment, and also create some connections and a personal touch that can be remembered later when international students might be applying for jobs at the company. Beyond the models themselves, the special ingredient we've seen for welcoming economies lies in asking oneself this question: what is important to your region's economic development mainstream? So not asking what are the needs of immigrants themselves, but asking what are the needs of the regional economy as a whole. And then based on these priorities, be they job creation, talent retention, or neighborhood development, how can immigrants support regional economic development goals? It's from this viewpoint that mainstream actors decide to include immigrants in their regional economic development strategy. To implement the models that we've examined, it really takes a comprehensive, multi-sector, whole-of-community approach. Organizations in the We Global Network have found success engaging government, business, and nonprofit actors to get these programs off the ground. And that's really what it takes. It can't be done alone, has been the experience of these organizations. Over the past 3 years, 30 communities across the United States have undertaken a multi-sector community planning process with support from Welcoming America and our partner New American Economy through our Gateways for Growth Challenge. The frame for the challenge is the economic benefits of immigration. So communities receive stories and data demonstrating immigrants' local economic impact to help them make the case and bring in new partners. So they're able to see the amount of taxes that immigrants are paying, the number of jobs that are created, the types of sectors in which immigrants are working. The data help the lead organizations to champion welcoming. Existing economic development programs may not be aware of the untapped potential of working with residents born outside the United States. When they're exposed to the economic case for serving immigrant job seekers, entrepreneurs, and home buyers, they often see a win-win and come on board if they weren't already part of the initiative. The result of the community planning process is usually a final strategic plan with recommendations and action steps for economic, social, and civic outcomes. Since people are more likely to succeed economically in a community where they're welcomed and valued in all aspects of their lives, we find that efforts to advance social and civic integration are an important complement to these economic development strategies in the plans, even when the focus is really around the economic impact of immigrants. The planning process can be convened by a local government, chamber of commerce, or a nonprofit actor. We've seen it work well in all cases. What's important is that the whole of society is involved and sees themselves in the plan, that they see themselves in the end as responsible for carrying out certain components that were recommended and that are included in the action steps. Another crucial strategy that we can talk more about, perhaps during the panel, is to be sure to talk with a wide array of community stakeholders. Through the planning process, you need to directly engage with immigrant workers, of course, to understand the needs and the opportunities that they see. It's equally important to take the concerns and ideas of longtime residents into consideration when expanding access to economic opportunity for newcomers, and to keep that in mind in your messaging as well about the plan and the shared prosperity that will come from this plan. This is especially important for historically underserved residents who may, in hearing about a plan to expand economic opportunity for immigrants, wonder where they might see themselves in that plan. So this approach brings in all residents and fosters belonging and ownership. As more communities have designed welcoming plans and built welcoming infrastructure, we started to hear at Welcoming America that places wanted a roadmap for the policies, programs, and partnerships that it takes to be a welcoming economy and community. So at Welcoming America, we created the Welcoming Standard with a host of partners and experts in the field, and the Welcoming Standard outlines these core strategies across 7 framework areas that you see here: leadership, education, economic development, civic engagement, connected communities, safe communities, and equitable access. The standard also sets benchmarks that community organizations, residents, and others can use to hold welcoming places accountable and inspire continued innovation. Communities across the United States are now implementing the standard and building it into their community plans, and New Zealand and Australia have developed their own standards based on this model. Here you can see a few examples of programs in the economic development area of the standard. So for those in the back who may not be able to see, the first and the second are assisting immigrant job seekers with information, training, and networking, and supporting immigrant entrepreneurs and business owners in starting, building, and growing their companies. These are tested approaches that will sound intuitive if you've been working in this field, that in order to have a welcoming economy and a welcoming community, you would really need to have some type of partnership in place to support these strategies. Communities who meet the rigorous welcoming standard can earn the title of Certified Welcoming. Certified Welcoming assesses city and county governments against the standard through an audit process. The process and the designation hold the local government and partners accountable and requires continuous improvement upon the baseline from the initial audit. Those places that earn the title of Certified Welcoming are showcasing their 21st century global welcoming economy to the world and building a competitive advantage. And we've started to see that cities and counties that are certified welcoming have begun to use the designation in their marketing materials, through their chambers of commerce and their visitors conventions, in order to demonstrate outside of their region that they really are a welcoming and inclusive place. So we've only scratched the surface of model programs and approaches that we've seen some success with. So I want to leave you with a few resources. The Welcoming Economies Playbook is our newest resource. It's designed to provide readers with an understanding of what is possible when immigrants are embraced into regional economic development plans. The guide chronicles a number of local initiatives in areas such as entrepreneurship, workforce development, and highly skilled worker initiatives. And it pairs case-making data and stories that you can pull out and use as talking points with then model programs that are supported by that data. Another go-to resource is the Guide to Immigrant Economic Development, written by Steve Tabachman of Global Detroit. And this is almost an encyclopedia of related programs and strategies. So anything that you might be looking at implementing, it has a host of programs that are in that area. You'll also check out Seeds of Growth if you're interested in immigrant entrepreneurs specifically. That guide hones in on supports for entrepreneurs. And if you're looking at doing a community plan, we wrote a guide called the Community Planning Process Guide. And this walks you from point A to point B and highlights the city of Boise's planning process as an example of what this really looks like on the ground. And you can find these resources and others on welcomingamerica.org or weglobalnetwork.org. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to hearing from the other panelists and getting to some of your questions. And in the meantime, I've left my contact information here and would love to speak with you after the panel or get in touch with you after today. Thanks.
Thank you for a very rich presentation, lots for us to continue thinking about and analyzing. And we're going to hear some more about some of the themes presented by Christina, starting with our next speaker, who is Robin Webb, Director, Labour Market Development at the Halifax Partnership and the founding Executive Director of Halifax acclaimed Connector Program. So welcome, Robin.
Thank you so much, Kim. It's a pleasure to be here today and share with those of you that are interested in some of the work that started in Halifax and now is national in scope and international as well. So, as Kim had mentioned, I'm with the Halifax Partnership, and I just thought I'd just tell you a little bit about the background as to why we developed this program. So 10 years ago, I was knocking on doors every day. We're an economic development organization, and we wanted to know, what are some of the challenges that businesses are facing in Nova Scotia? We wanted them to grow their business and to do more exporting and increase productivity. What was the main barrier? So after meeting with hundreds of businesses over a couple of years, whether the economy was doing really well or very poorly, one of the top 3 concerns facing businesses was access to the right talent, which was strange because in Nova Scotia generally had a higher unemployment rate than others. But it was the case, it was the right talent. So what we were doing is when we heard about these challenges, we connected them to the local immigrant settlement organizations and hoping that we would open the door for them to start considering hiring immigrants and and we allowed the settlement organizations to build relationships, ongoing relationships with the business community, so that their workforce could be supported in their aim to be more inclusive. It still wasn't working. So we were thinking, why isn't this working? It should be. What we determined was that 80% of the jobs, I know you've heard the statistics before, but I can't prove it, but they say 80% of the jobs are a hidden job market. So how does somebody new to the community ever learn about these jobs? The typical way of finding a job is going online or the job boards, but in smaller communities, I thought, in Halifax, but no, it's across Canada, in all communities, the challenges are that smaller businesses don't have the money to brand themselves. So they don't really, or they may not have a human resource person that can actually knows how to hire properly. So they'll pick up the phone and phone somebody, a trusted member in their business circle. Do you know anybody? I'm looking for someone in marketing. So what we thought is, how do we make that connection? How do we help support immigrants to build their business, their professional business networks? And I think that's the way that they would find those opportunities. So with the help of Maytree, 10 years ago, we launched the Connector program in Halifax. So this is a fairly old video, so please don't pay attention to the numbers that are shown here, but it just explains it fairly quickly.
When you make a connection, great things happen. And that's just what the Halifax Partnership is setting out to do through our Connector program. Here's how it works. We connect local and international graduates, immigrants, and young professionals with local business and community leaders in their field of interest. They get together and talk about things like industry trends, market demand, and local opportunities. The connector leaves the connectee with at least 3 names of people in their network, and the whole process happens all over again. What do they get out of it? Glad you asked. The experience provides valuable insight into the local job market and sets the connectee on the path to create their own success. The connector gets to help cultivate new local talent, making their industry and our city grow stronger. It's a win-win, win-win-win. In the first 5 years, we've seen great success. Over 1,000 connectees and over 650 connectors have joined the program, resulting in over 450 found jobs. And we've started a trend. We help other communities across Canada start their Connector program. For more information on joining the Connector program or starting one in your community, visit halifaxpartnership.com. Because at the Halifax Partnership, we think the strongest connection is a human one.
So the program was not in existence in our community at all. We have some really strong mentorship programs in Halifax, but mentorship is a much bigger ask for those that are involved. It's a larger commitment. And there are a lot of people that would like to help, but they just don't know how. So what we asked of business leaders was just a half hour of their time, just to sit down, as the video mentioned, have a cup of coffee with a newcomer that is looking for work in your industry. It's not a job interview, so there is no pressure on either the connectee or the connector. It's just a really great conversation about the industry. Then the commitment from every connector is that they will provide a referral to 3 people in their business network. Those 3 people, the same thing. They have a cup of coffee, they learn, and each time the newcomer is getting more familiar with the local Canadian Halifax business environment, how people interact in the offices that they're having these meetings, and they're just becoming more comfortable in so when a job interview does happen, they're more prepared. So now all of a sudden they've got 13 people that know about Anju Gupta with this great background from India. So, because in the past, to be honest, the smaller companies may never have interviewed a newcomer before. They may not feel very comfortable. They might be afraid of offending, or just not they've got 2 resumes. One is, Sam Smith from graduated from Dalhousie University from a commerce degree. I'm really familiar with that, where he worked before. And, I probably know his uncle. Then we have Anju Gupta. Oh, her credentials look even better than Sam's, but I'm not really familiar with that university. And I have no idea these companies that the person worked for. I'm not sure, what is it, a large company, small company, and maybe I'm pronouncing the name wrong. So I'm just going to go with Sam, even though he's probably not as qualified. So what we're changing through this program is also hiring processes. So instead of playing it safe, you can be braver and emboldened and see how comfortable it is to actually meet with newcomers. Now all of a sudden, the next time that you go to hire, you're not going to be so quick to skim over Anju Gupta's resume. So at first, when we started the program, it was at a very senior level. It was at a CEO level. And then we decided, those are the busiest people. And everybody in your workplace is well connected. So everybody, we can all be connectors. So we broadened it to include that we're all connectors. So if I'm focusing on one thing today, it's that it's the simplicity of this program. It's meet, connect, and refer. And the connector coordinator, program coordinator, does an intake with every single newcomer. Also does an intake with every new connector, and provides them with toolkits. The toolkits include really valuable information. For the newcomer, it's, they're all of a sudden armed with questions, proper questions to ask, sample questions. Also, they've had an intake with us, so they're a little bit more comfortable with what that feels like. They also have access to resources, incentives for employers to hire them that are offered both, municipally wise or provincial wise or federal wise. So they could say here, do you know about this program, the START program, or what have you? And the business person also gets to learn about those great resources. So the Connector program, as I mentioned, we're celebrating our 10th year this year, so we're very excited about that. We've been recognized globally and nationally for the program, and we're thrilled about that. And it's been replicated in over 36 other locations across Canada, as well as internationally under the National Connector program. So we've got about 6 communities in the U.S., and the entire country of Sweden has adopted it on a virtual basis, and Bern, Switzerland. So the Halifax Connector program to date has worked with 1,290 connectors, 3,043 connectees. So that's a lot of people in a small city of Halifax, and 1,263 have found jobs. That ratio is so high. And the reason I think it is so high is that although we have a fabulous tracking system that has the correct algorithms to do the matches and provide, a list of viable matches, because the Connector program has met with both of them, they can pick out which ones they think would have a nicer meeting. So I think that's why we see such success in the results. Because it's not uncommon for, someone to not have a job posting when they sit down with somebody, but all of a sudden they're meeting with this great person and they're thinking, 6 months from now I was going to hire someone in that capacity. Maybe I'll make that decision now. Because internationally trained professionals, I think I'm speaking to the converted here when I say they bring with them skills that maybe smaller cities just aren't even aware they don't know that they need. Building confidence in exporting markets, just new technologies and different approaches and perspectives. All of these things are so important. So it's not who you know, it's what you know. So it has to be both to be successful. So as I mentioned, we are delighted to have had interest from across the country in this program. When we first launched it, it was just the Halifax Connector program. We didn't have a toolkit like what we do now. And St. Louis, was one of the early adopters in the U.S. in Detroit as well as many. I think there was about 6 different communities across Canada that said, "We really like what you're doing. Can we copy it?" We said, "Sure. Here's our marketing material." But that's all we really could do to help them launch their programs, and so. Back in 2013, we applied to IRCC to have a national connector secretariat, and our goal was to provide all the training materials and resources to offer a turnkey operation to communities that are looking to start their own connector program in their communities. So we've developed everything that you need, from your marketing collateral to your toolkits, to your press announcements, anything that you could possibly need, we have and continue to build on that resource hub for new communities. So when a new community calls up and they say, really interested in your program, think it might be great for our community, I'll offer to come out and bring all of the potential partners to the table and have that discussion early on before we go any further. Because you really must have the immigrant settlement service providers at the table. And if you're looking at including an international graduate stream, you need to have the universities at the table. You need to have business at the table. And you need to have your funders at the table. So, quite often what we see is the provincial funders are at the table. So they're all seeing how this program fits in the early on and seeing how they can contribute, what role they play, and whether, you must have support from all in order to make it successful. So that's what we found works best. So as you can see, here's a list of the current operating programs in Canada. And since 2013, this does not include Halifax's numbers because we were prior to the National Connector Program. But as you can see, it's starting to build momentum. The numbers, they're pretty slow when they first start out. There's a community will probably just pilot 50 newcomers, 50 volunteers in the business community, and try that out. So then they launch up to, each program coordinator can roughly work with 100 people each year. So it takes a while to ramp up that first year. But so when you start, how can you start a connector program? As I mentioned, you express an interest in the program. We meet the National Connector Program team, and we even help with proposals and budgets and all those questions that you might need to fill out a proposal. And one of the unique things about the National Connector Program is that everybody shares their resources. There's a resource hub, and there's no secrets. We've had Toronto working with Ottawa and sharing proposals, and it's just been amazing. It's non-competitive. It's really wonderful because we learn from every new community that comes on board. Their lens may be a little bit different, so we review everyone's and share with everyone, and the communities can pick what they like, pick and choose what they like out of all of them. So then we help them with their kickoff, their launch of their program, and then we have monthly teleconference calls where the program coordinators get to share new ideas, or they have a hurdle. What do we do? Like when Calgary had some troubles in their economy, what do we do? How do we get connectors to give 3? They're only giving 2. So, we do some brainstorming to help with that. So, because we are coast to coast, and even in the Yukon now, we were invited to be part of the Planning for Canada initiative, and so for the National Pre-Arrival Connector Program. So this has been a great resource. The talent that we've gotten, that's been referred has been amazing. So they'll come to Halifax, and then we'll see which destination. We do a bit of an intake, and then we look at what destination city they have in mind. And if the connector program is there, we refer them on to that city. And then often, through Skype type interviews, they have 3 meetings set up for them when they arrive in their city. I mean, it's just amazing opportunity for them to connect right away. So, as I said, one of the challenges for Nova Scotia and most cities across Canada, other than maybe Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal, is that we are an aging workforce. So we've expanded our program in Halifax to include international graduates as well as local graduates. So this year, the end of March, we're launching a Connector Plus, which is a web-based app that will allow this program to be virtual. So connectors can participate both in the face-to-face as well as the online. So we're starting out with Nova Scotia. The launch will be in Nova Scotia, and it will just be for local and international graduates. We realize after speaking with many immigrant settlement service providers that there's a lot more work that needs to be involved before we open it up to the immigrant stream, which hopefully will be in the next 2 years. So next year we'll be hopefully rolling it out across Atlantic Canada, because Atlantic Canada shares that whole challenge with talent retention, right? So we're very excited about that. That's been a lot of fun, developing an app. So it's simple and effective online program that builds professional networks. And it's the same thing. You participants can still have that face-to-face meeting, which will allow the partnership to actually target the talent that we really need in the high growth sectors, but allow everyone to participate that is a recent graduate, so they can participate online as well. There's still only one referral, one match that the coordinator will make with one person. So we want to make sure that through this online as well as the face-to-face, that the person is actually ready, because they'll only get one opportunity. So to wrap up, that is the program in a nutshell. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Robin. That's very exciting. We're going to have our eyes on the Connector program in March when you launch. Thank you. So we're going to move quickly right over to now our next guest, Tamara Sabrini, who is the Senior Manager Development and Community Engagement at Scadding Community Centre, and she joins us to share the success of this brilliant business out of the box model. So she'll be talking about that small business incubation and sort of entrepreneurial strand that's so important to a welcoming economy. Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Kim. Is there a stand for that? Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Kim. Thanks so much for having me here. I recently left Ryerson, so it's nice to be back and see some familiar faces. Also, bear with me. I'm fairly new to Scadding Court, so I'm going to read my slides. All right. So, let me just hit. So Scadding Court, I will get started. Scadding Court Community Centre is located in West Toronto, downtown West Toronto, adjacent to one of the city's larger social housing complexes, so Alexandra Park and the Atkinson Cooperative. And we've always focused our efforts on serving the needs of the local community, so the Atkinson Co-op community, and the needs of low-income and racialized population groups, youth, and newcomer communities. Thank you. So we have about 60% of the residents in that neighborhood are newcomers. So we offer sort of a wide range of programming, from early years to senior programs, and sort of wraparound social services supports. And sort of daily, we see about 500 people use our community center. So I'll be really brief in terms of background. But I think something important to note is something that makes us unique is that we're using sort of non-traditional approaches to address system issues for low-income, racialized, and newcomer communities. So we're developing cross-sector innovations and partnership ecosystems, keeping a focus on economic advancement and leveraging resources to generate opportunities. So we aim to think creatively about ways to financially sustain our program. So beyond grants and donations, we sort of try and think of new ways to generate revenue. And so to do this, we developed a social franchise model that provides an important source of revenue for the center, while simultaneously creating an economic development project that fills a gap in the services in our community. So recognizing the importance of finding new ways to broaden local employment opportunities, in 2011, we launched Market 707. It's sort of a social enterprise container market that we built on the sidewalk in front of the center. So we retrofitted shipping containers and offered them as affordable retail spaces for low-income newcomers and local youth as a way to create pathways to help people in our community become more economically independent. So this market has taken underutilized space and transformed a formerly sort of dull stretch of Dundas Street West into an animated community space that's created an attractive landmark for the neighborhood. So what started as 4 brightly painted retrofitted containers has turned into an outdoor market that's quite large now and houses 22 small businesses, a bike repair shop, a cell phone repair shop, a tattoo parlor, and a wide range of international foods. So our success at Market 707 led to the development of Business Out of a Box. And that's sort of a social franchise model whereby we support other community groups to install and operate a container market in their community and ultimately help support local economies and foster inclusive communities. In our experience, the development of these spaces transforms the economic environment from the bottom up through creating a welcoming, inclusive, shared space for community members to come together and access goods and services. And at the same time, there's a top-down process where growing local businesses also help transform the economic environment and enable individuals to create and pursue entrepreneurial opportunities. The social dividends created as a result of the, I'm going to call it the Bob model, make a compelling case for why this model should be replicated in other communities, including rural communities. It provides increased economic accessibility for low-income, unemployed, newcomer, and youth entrepreneurs who may traditionally be excluded from the entrepreneurial sector. So 75% of the entrepreneurs at Market 707 were actually born outside of Canada. And as we all know, newcomers often face significant systemic obstacles in entering the labor force. And so micro-enterprise can be an attractive alternative. But there may also be many barriers for small entrepreneurs. And in Toronto, we know access to affordable space can be one of those significant barriers. So the informal infrastructure of the sort of modular design concept allows us to provide low-cost space for the new entrepreneurs to test their business ideas in a low-risk environment. And so affordable rent in these containers is as low as $11 to $26 a day. It's very, very affordable. So by removing some of the initial capital investments that newcomers may lack the resources for, we're able to create conditions that encourage successful entrepreneurship and lower the risk of potential losses. Creating a local retail community creates an environment that breaks down some of the isolation that can often be associated with starting a business and sort of creates a space where businesses are guaranteed a certain amount of publicity and foot traffic simply through their maintained presence at the market. The space also creates a community of entrepreneurs who can support each other. So it facilitates learning and shared resources between the business owners and helps build their social capital and create stronger community connections. This model is also a powerful city building and placemaking tool. These spaces can help animate the public realm and bring together individuals who may not have had the opportunity to otherwise interact. A space or a neighborhood that may be underutilized can be transformed into a welcoming and inclusive shared space that enhances community engagement and creates awareness of local talent. And these sort of pedestrian-friendly zones contribute to quality of life and are key to creating a city atmosphere that's vibrant and engaging. So, as I mentioned, these markets are sort of established from the bottom up, and so they can adapt to the varied needs of the community, and as a result, can help address service gaps and increase the accessibility of culturally relevant foods and locally made unique products and services. And so a good example of this is one of our businesses is called Clean Locks, and it's run by a woman who moved to the Alexandra Park neighborhood from Jamaica and noticed there was nowhere in the neighborhood for her to get her dreadlocks cleaned. So she started this business, and she's got tons of business. People come from across the city to come see her. She's been able to move off of social assistance, and she's doing really well. And so significant for Scanning Port, of course, is that Market 707 also generates revenue for the center. So all of the surplus funds get reinvested into the community programs and services. And the model is important for us for sustaining some of our critical and core programs, such as our after four programs for children, and programs that may not always be sort of sexy to funders, depending on sort of the time of day. So we're able to sort of ensure that we have a stable source of funding throughout the year. So I just wanted to sort of do a little snapshot of some of our entrepreneurs. The program is built on lessons learned from their experiences and the experiences of more than 50 under-resourced entrepreneurs who have used these platforms. Oops. Going too fast. Who have sort of used these platforms as a way to establish their businesses and generate income. So this is, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on here. Did I do something wrong? Oh, there we go.
Timed, yeah.
Okay. So this is that was Diona Joyce. And she came to Canada from the Philippines. She was a pharmaceutical sales representative. She started here working at a fast food chain. Sorry. Okay. And then later she started a small catering business, and she opened at Market 707 in 2012, and she now employs more than 3 people, and in 2015 she won the People's Choice Award for her food at the Cultura Filipino Arts Festival. This is Cookie Martinez. She is from Colombia, and she began her business selling homemade cookies and ice cream sandwiches at seasonal markets. And she opened at Market 707 and now has a full food menu, and she makes amazing empanadas, so I highly recommend you come visit. This is Shinji Yamaguchi. He runs Gushi, which some of you may be familiar with. He started at Market 707 when he was 21. He spoke very little English, and he's now expanded to 2 stalls, and he has a storefront on Queen Street West, and they're at almost every sort of event that goes on in Toronto, so they're really popular, and they have a staff of more than 5 people, so he's done really, really well. So I will end off with some lessons learned. These are lessons that have been passed on to me, so hopefully I relay them well to you, but we can discuss more after the presentation. But I think some of the things that have contributed to our growth and success, or as I think some of the previous presentations mentioned, multi-sector support is really important. So, utilize the partnerships around you. We've really utilized our relationships with our city councilors, and we've also utilized relationships with the private sector. So we've done replication of this market on planning sites. So where developers are still, in the planning stages, we've made use of that land and been able to transform it into a temporary market. Also, ensure that this market is accessible to newcomers. So, consider their difficulty with formal financing, credit, or credit checks and business plans. We don't require any of that. We simply ask for first and last month's rent, and away they go. Also, sort of in that vein, flexibility with vendor agreements has been really useful. So we offer sort of month-to-month or short-term leases just to make it really accessible for people to try out what they had in mind. We also, because we're uniquely situated as a community center, we offer additional support, so settlement services, childcare, but also sort of similar to the NDC program that was mentioned earlier. Sort of evaluations of our market found that entrepreneurs were seeking additional business supports. So we recently launched a newcomer entrepreneurship hub and a women's entrepreneurship hub that offers sort of skill building and coaching and mentorship and a training opportunity for some of the vendors and for other newcomers who then can test out their opportunity or test out their businesses in our market. And, I think the market organically builds community, but when you're sort of designing events around that, think about the local community and ensuring that those events are relevant to the local community to ensure that they sort of come out and are interested. And as the local operator, Scatting Court is very active with promoting the market and trying to bring customers to the market and maintaining the space. And lastly, if you're going to start something like this, creative solutions are needed. So, it might mean new processes for city approvals. It might mean financing and partnerships. So just, try and think out of the box when you are establishing this model. And that's it.
Thank you, Tamara. That really is a great example of thinking out of the box and doing business out of the box. Bravo. So we're going to move now to our next speaker before our Q&A, and that's Devin Franklin, who wears many hats. She's project manager of Ryerson's booming magnet export business portal and manager of the employer-led Hire Immigrants program. But back in 2015, it was Hire Immigrants that stepped up to play convener to the Syrian Refugee Jobs Agenda Roundtable here in Toronto, a coalition of private and public institutional employers who came together to develop strategies to increase access to employment and optimize the talent and skills of the newly arrived. And so I welcome Devin to tell us about that.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. It's great going last because everyone said a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about. And I know we're a little over time, so I'm going to be pretty quick because I want to get to a discussion. I'm really happy that this is happening. I feel like Kim and I have been talking about this for since 2015 about how important it is to talk about really looking at more rural, economically depressed regions and how do we ensure that they're supported with immigrant talent. So just a little bit about Hire Immigrants, so what makes us unique for those of you that don't know. Hire Immigrants really focuses on employers. So it's looking at the other side of the employment dichotomy and how do we support employers to leverage this talent pool. It was founded by Ratna Ahmedvar, and her logic was there's lots of support and services for newcomers that are coming and trying to enter the labor market, but not a lot of focus on how do we make sure that employers are ready for this new talent force, and really being able to support them with tools, resources, and really just answering those questions that many of them have. We do that in a number of different ways. Making the business case is really a priority for us, so we have a series of success stories that we profile, led by employer voices, where employers share their lessons learned, their best practices. If I could do this all over again, how would I improve on it? We look at outdated hiring practices and how do we evolve those, how do we look for more innovative solutions for employers. If a newcomer doesn't have to have any communication skills, then why are you not allowing them to come in and interview because they don't communicate as well in the interview process? So helping them to see and make sure that their hiring practices really reflect the roles and positions that they're looking to fill. And then helping to be a connector. So as Kim said, what I'm primarily going to talk about is the Refugee Jobs Agenda Roundtable, and Hire Immigrants is often, because we're not a direct service provider, are often a connector between an employer who's looking to hire and a settlement or service agency that we can connect them to make that hire and to build that program. So as Kim said, in 2015, we had the opportunity that was led by the ensuing welcome of the Syrian refugees that came to Canada, and led by Ratna. It was really looking at, immediate settlement concerns were being addressed with housing and ensuring that people had clothes and that people had places to live and healthcare. And yet there wasn't really a lot of communication about what were these newcomers going to do in terms of work. And so Ratna really kind of sent out a call to action to community partners, to local employers, and said, if you're interested and engaged and looking to help, let's all come together. And really what started as an informal roundtable, let's just sit at a table and talk about what you can do to support and how are you looking to engage. And the response was really remarkable. We had, and what was, with Hire Immigrants behind Ratna, it really was focusing on how do we ensure that private and public sector employers are at the table kind of first and foremost. We often find that at these discussions, the employers are actually quite minimal at the table, and we really wanted to make sure that they were kind of front and center to really understand what were the challenges that you anticipate in terms of hiring this population, and how do we connect you adequately to the people who can support you in doing that. And that's really where the community organizations, service providers, I echo Robin's comment about having funders at the table, so having the province there was critical critical. You can have a great idea, but if nobody has funding to actually initiate it, then it just stays as a great idea. So having government at the table was really important. Regional chambers, industry associations, so if businesses themselves can attend, because we know they're busy people, how do you get the people who represent them to at least attend and be that voice for business? And then again, educational institutions. So if you're looking at, how do you refer internationally trained individuals to bridging programs, you have to have those institutions at the table so you understand what the barriers are and are very transparent with that process. And so as I said, we had a great turnout. We had over 40 members who kind of came out in the initial. As everyone here can appreciate, when you're working with different stakeholders, of the 40, people all come out of the gate, and then you really have your champions, and that's really what I've highlighted here. The people who really stuck with it for the whole kind of year and a half. We were meeting regularly, and we're really committed to seeing benefit and to seeing more refugees end up in meaningful employment. These are just a few of the outcomes, and again, this was a year and a half of meeting, every 2 to 3 months. It was meeting, first thing in the morning to accommodate our businesses that were participating, and Ratna had a no-nonsense agenda, so there was no chit-chat, it was right to business, and it was really looking at who is going to do what, and holding people accountable to making sure that happened. Some of our kind of stellar employers that came out was LAUNA, which is a local trade union. And again, they identified at the very first meeting, we have a huge gap in terms of labor market shortage. We knew that we had a number of refugees that were coming in that had manual labor experience, and how do we speed that up? So to Tamara's point, looking at innovative solutions, we know that there are trade apprenticeship programs, but do we really want to put refugees through a year program to get them started, or is there a way that we can start them faster so they can improve their language acquisition, understand the Canadian labor market, so they can be more successful in those more formal training programs? So that involved George Brown, the LAUNA local chamber, Access Employment, Refugee Career Jumpstart. I mean, it really was a powerhouse of community stakeholders that came together. And the success of the program, in the first 6 months, they had 60 people go through the program, 60 refugees go through the program. All of them ended up in employment, and all of their starting wages were nothing was less than $18 an hour. So a great starting wage, a way for them to get in, and their language acquisition ended up being one of the key highlights of the program. In 3 months, their language acquisition had improved way faster than if they had been just dedicated to going to language training full time. Starbucks came out, and Robin had mentioned kind of the meet and greet model. That was the model that worked really well for them. They did kind of mass hiring initiatives with Access Employment, bringing people in and allowing them to have more of an informal meeting with Starbucks managers. And the BDC internship program, they were really keen on looking at foreign trained refugees that had a finance background, and how do we support them to, again, learn more about the Canadian labor market and learn more about working at an FI in Canada. And so they started, their goal was to start, small and then grow. So they started with 5 interns. All of them were offered full-time positions after their internship. And now it's grown in Toronto to 15, and they've opened up the internship program at their Ottawa office, and they're looking to take it national with Access Employment. So small initiatives, starting small, figuring out a pilot, and then expanding it based on the success. So now that we're kind of outside of the roundtable, and for those of you that I believe a few of you are attending a tent event tonight, we're hoping to revitalize the roundtable with a broader focus on all vulnerable newcomers. And some of the employer feedback has been in kind of looking at the roundtable model and wanting to understand how do we improve it, how do we continue it. There was a lot of feedback, that there was this desire to engage with this new population, whether it's refugees or just newcomers generally. But there was a real gap in employers' understanding of where to get started. And I think in this conversation, when we're talking about rural communities, it's important to think about how much greater that barrier would be in a community that is not used to engaging with newcomers at all. So for, these were Toronto-based employers, and they said, I had no idea who Access Employment was. I had no idea that YMCA, I could go to them and ask them about employment opportunities. I don't know the difference between Wood Green and YMCA and Access, and that a newcomer can't just bounce around to every agency And just connecting with other employers. Starbucks doesn't frequently sit at the same table as BDC, and so understanding that yes, they're different industries, but the lessons learned translate across those industries. And so I think that's what I find really exciting about the Immigrant Futures project and then the program, and what Kim and her team are trying to accomplish is really looking at, if we understand that there are challenges in Toronto and in Montreal and in Vancouver, our metropolis cities that are these receptor cities for newcomers, this is exacerbated in rural communities that, again, have never and don't have the experience in working with newcomer populations. So it's important to understand the role of employers and to listen to those concerns, especially at rural and smaller city centers, so that they're supported and connected with the resources that are readily available for them. Some of the success stories that we frequently look to, and Hire Immigrants had a webinar series on rural communities and on what recruitment and retention look like, is really looking at Winkler and Morden, Manitoba, small communities that almost doubled their population in 3 years with immigrant recruitment program. Their mayor was going to the airport and picking up newcomers and showing them around, because it's not just I focused a lot on employment and employers, but it's also, what are their partners going to do? Where are their kids going to go to school? How are they going to build a social network so that their wives or husbands feel included as well? So to Christina's point, that welcoming economy goes hand in hand with the welcoming community. Looking at the Rural Employment Initiative led by the Newcomer Center of Peel, I think we have this, and I'm definitely guilty of this arrogance that everybody wants to live in a metropolis city. And the reality is that there's lots of newcomers that come from smaller cities or rural communities where they want to be able to walk their kid to school, and they want to know their neighbors, and they want to be able to buy a house, and they don't want to live in an apartment. And I think it's important that newcomers understand that there are opportunities outside of the city, but also making sure that those communities are ready to receive those newcomers. And I know the Ontario government has a community immigrant retention program, which I encourage anybody who's here from Ontario and looking to work with rural communities to check out that program. So I'll just end on, again, the need to build capacity, and we're thinking about rural and smaller cities, connecting, as has been said by every presenter, that multi-stakeholder approach really is the key to success. And again, beyond just simply getting people employed and having them find meaningful employment, it's also remembering that the community has to be able to receive those children, those partners, and really help build those social networks. Shameless plug, Hire Immigrants just relaunched our new website. We have a brand new report on 13 international best practices around refugee labor market integration. It's on our homepage. I encourage you to read it and subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you.
Thanks, Devin. That was a great way to end the formal presentations. I think Devin brought us back to many of the points that were made at the beginning by Christina. So I'm going to turn over our panel. I'm going to invite the panel to sit down at the front of the room, and I'm going to invite Sarah Wayland to join us at the podium. Sarah is going to lead the first part of our discussion. And Sarah Wayland is the founder and project lead for Global Hamilton with the City of Hamilton's Office of Economic Development, where she also leads as senior project manager for the Hamilton Integration Partnerships. She's a dual U.S.-Canadian citizen, so that global perspective has made her a widely respected researcher and expert on a wide range of immigration issues. So, perfect facilitator to greet our esteemed panel. So please, thanks. There you go.
Great. Thank you so much. While the panelists are coming up and getting seated, we have room for 4 people up at the front there. Thank you so much for inviting me here, Kim. And wow, it's a really rich array of presentations, and I've heard a really compelling case this morning for a very strategic and intentional approach to designing a welcoming economy. And I know that many of you probably have questions. I have some pre-questions that I'm going to be asking the panelists, and I know we're running a little bit beyond time, but I've been given permission that we can go a bit over time, so I'm just giving you a heads up that that's going to be happening. So I want to start with our speaker, Christina Pope, and really to ask you about a question about leadership. And how do you cultivate leadership in the different cities that you've been promoting in the United States? How does the community engagement get started? We've heard about the need for a multi-stakeholder approach, but really, how do you get started and what works?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. I think the welcoming economies approach has impacted the way that this has happened nationally. And so we've seen that taking a welcoming economies approach, talking about the data and immigrant contributions, brings in new actors and new champions. So chambers of commerce who come from this viewpoint, economic development agencies, and in the We Global region and beyond, these models have created some actionable strategies that partners can actually dig into. And so where before businesses or chambers of commerce may have heard about immigrant integration strategies but not really seen themselves in those strategies, models like entrepreneurship development, workforce development, they start to see a role that they can play. So I think that's where the multi-sector approach comes in, is that there are needs and opportunities that local government or nonprofits might identify, and then that businesses can tap into.
Okay, so I might start with some conversations at the high levels, people taking it to making the business case.
Right, it starts with that person-to-person conversation, and really with the question from perhaps nonprofit or a local government, if working with a business, of what are your needs right now, what are the challenges that you are seeing, and then identifying where there's a shared opportunity, that if the challenge is really around labor needs and skills gaps, that perhaps immigrants can help to fill that need. So it's that common people connecting approach based on a shared mission.
Okay, thanks very much. And I'm going to move on to Robin, but Robin, I wondered if you had anything to add into what we were just talking about the leadership.
I think that leadership, I totally agree with what Christina said. I mean, you have to have buy-in from at a senior level in all areas. Influencers is really not necessarily leadership by title, but leadership by natural leadership. Who are the ones that believe in what you're doing and who will commit to, providing support to see that carried out. So, you have to identify very soon, early on, who are the right people at the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if I can add to that, to be candid, it's the usefulness of having a chamber of commerce at the table really depends from city to city, because it depends how engaged that chamber of commerce is in their community broadly and how tapped in they are to the real needs of the business community. So I think you make a great point about identifying the natural champions. That it may not be at the CEO level, or it may not be the person that's most front and center, but it might be somebody who's a behind-the-scenes influencer.
Great, thanks so much. I wanted to address a question to Robin. The Connector program has really seen remarkable accomplishments over the past decade, so congratulations to you. And I'm wondering what you can tell us about sustainability or the long game. Was there kind of a tipping point in the Connector program or the Connector's path to success, and what can other city startups learn from that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's, to be honest, it is something that we're much better at now than what we were at the beginning with helping new communities start up. For us, even to today, even though the program has been going on for 10 years in Halifax, it's still year-to-year funding, but we know it's just a phone call, these are the results. They're part of everything we do. We engage them in every aspect, so that it's not a surprise at the end of the year that we're going to expect to continue this program. So it's like having a conversation early on to say, are we able to turn that into a 2-year contract this year? So I really love and respect what IRCC's new formula is, and that's the 5-year funding. I think that will really allow programs to establish themselves. Otherwise, I've seen it, where new communities have been funded by one organization, and it's a pilot. And it's quite, I'm not going to say easy, but it's much easier to get funding for a pilot than it is for the ongoing funding of a program. So I think that we all need to be, sharing that viewpoint that, we've put the work in for the pilot. We don't want to keep having a pilot every year because, it loses momentum. In fact, we've had 2 communities that have had to restart with different organizations because they know that the community needs it there, but the funding partner was not able to sustain it. So I think when we're talking to new communities and the resources of, early on in the stage, early on when they're putting together their proposals for funding, is asking them to ask that question, have that relationship, that partnership with their funder that, this is a pilot, and we're really excited about it, but we want to ensure that that this is a long-term goal for us. Are you able, do you see yourself in that future? Because it makes it much easier.
We've all been there when it comes to pilots, I think. So do any of the other panelists have any comments about sustainability or any insights they'd like to share?
Yeah, I think just echoing what Robin said, it's frustrating sometimes when you're working with government funders because of the way the funding cycles work. And even when you do have the results, so our construction trade program had fabulous results. We had 60 refugees land really meaningful work that aligned with their skills and competencies. They were getting paid above minimum wage, and yet we had to stall the program for almost 6 months to wait for funding to come in to offset some of the costs for the programming. So it's one of those frustrating hiccups that unfortunately nonprofit is privy to based on the government. So that's a bit more dismal than I wanted to come across. But,
but it's a reality.
It is a reality, and it is something I think for new communities to be aware of. And I think being transparent up front and setting expectations for new communities is so important so that they're not caught off guard when that dreadful March 31st comes and funding ends, and then there's a gap in services. So.
And it's ever shifting. We're looking at one province that was the connector supporter early on, and then when the Syrian refugees situation, well, of course they needed all hands on deck to help with that situation. So then the program lost for a couple of years. It just was. So it's like a restarting a program all over again. So it does. You lose that IP, you lose that enthusiasm, you lose the relationships, you lose all of those things when there is a 6-month even gap in funding. So it's a concern for I think most programs that have funding, that require funding. One of the things that we also like to do is include private sector funding. So for example, RBC has been a funder as well for the Halifax Connector program, and so they promote our speed interview sessions, and their logo is on everything. So that they've been consistent right from the start, and the province of Nova Scotia has been there right from the start, and has built that right into their main core, even though we only get funding proposal 1 year, or funding for 1 year, but it's built into their model. And that's what you want to do. You want to be built in.
Built in. Okay, good. I'd like to move on and ask a question about business out of the box, which is just a really exciting model. And in Hamilton, we're looking forward to launching our own mini version of business out of the box this coming summer. And I've been the city point person for that, so I'm deeply involved in zoning and regulations, business licensing, and the like. So I have a lot of questions for you after, actually. But just as smaller cities and regional communities look to revitalize neighborhoods and spur business development, how can we share some best practices and duplicate success without some of the pitfalls? Can you talk a bit about replicability?
Sure. That's going to sound sort of repetitive now, but I think it's important to mention again, I mentioned it in my presentation, and I think I'm echoing some of the things you've been saying, but where possible, really make sure that your local councillor is on board, and you're sort of, they can help you navigate some of the municipal bureaucracy and some of the hurdles that might be associated with establishing a market, and might help you with waiving fees and some of the practical or operational challenges that you might actually encounter when you go to actually build the market and do the market. But from also a different perspective, I think it's really important that the motivation for the market comes from the local community. So one of our replication sites is at Thorncliffe Park. They started the Park Cafe, and their model is a little bit different from ours to sort of adapt to the needs of their community. And so it's a women's collective that they started that operates as a community cafe. So several women all sort of do wealth sharing and responsibility sharing in the container. And the idea is that it's sort of creating a pipeline for some of those women to learn some of those business skills and then move on to do their own businesses. So, there are different ways to sort of create business out of the box as in a way that's appropriate for your setting. Another quick example that I didn't mention in my presentation, but I want to mention, is that we also have a commercial kitchen that we built out of one of the containers, and so that's another way that you could sort of utilize that design and use it as a way for local entrepreneurs to start catering and
Great. So there's no cookie cutter approach. You're learning kind of the best practices but filling that in with what works for the community in question, the local community.
And sort of that key piece is definitely leveraging your partnerships and getting leadership on board as much as possible.
Does anyone else want to respond about replicating your programs elsewhere? Because all of you have experience in that area as well.
Well, I can speak just quickly. We have a full turnkey operation I mentioned in the presentation, so that there's very, even to the position description, so it's definitely a whole package that comes along with ours. Of course, each community may have their unique spin, and we work with them, and they tailor it to suit their needs individually. So, but it's pretty standard.
Okay. Yep.
To mention, we also have a toolkit. So we're happy to share the toolkit with anyone who's interested.
Yeah, those are great.
They are.
Toolkits.
I think one thing I would add, and Sarah, you and I were talking about this, is really ensuring in those project plans and in those budgets that there is a budget for marketing. So often, and everyone at this table is doing fabulous work, and yet if you're not in this space and in that immediate connection, then that story doesn't get told. And so with Hamilton launching this, I hope I see it, all over the web, because I think just, Canadians generally, we need to do a better job of sharing our successes, so that other people can replicate them and can learn from them, and just, to put pressure on government that, these are really innovative ideas and really nuanced ways of approaching challenges, but if we're not talking about them, then they don't kind of get out of our space where, in the immigrant and settlement space.
Okay. Yep.
I think a similar point, but from another angle, is to build in a budget for community engagement. We found that some communities have gotten tripped up when they just try to dive right in with a model that's worked elsewhere, but they haven't fully brought in leaders in the community who can then be messengers to their constituents about the importance of the program or the importance of the planning process. And if you reach the end of the planning process, but the broader community doesn't see themselves in it or feels that they haven't given feedback, then you've wasted your time because you arrive at a plan that doesn't really have buy-in. So that piece of engaging both immigrant residents in terms of their needs, but then also the broader community, and especially historically underserved populations or other vulnerable populations, is hugely important to avoid that kind of backlash effect that can come from this work.
Okay, I want to move on to my last question for a panelist aimed at Devin. The employer response to the Syrian refugees' arrival was strong and swift, and a surprise to many of us. Yet you say many employers said they had no idea how to get involved and how to connect with immigrant and refugee serving organizations. What can we do about this disconnect, and how do especially we reach out to small and mid-sized businesses, because we're not all like Toronto with the corporate headquarters and the like.
Yeah, no. I think that was one of the most surprising things out of the roundtable. Is I think we think of these larger companies like Starbucks, like KPMG, and even RBC, that they are have the resources, they have the capacity, they have huge human resources departments, and so of course they know the full kind of myriad of settlement and service agencies, and the reality is they really didn't. They came in and understood about wanting to overcome hiring bias and wanting to be inclusive and had all the buzzwords, and that was great. But in terms of actually understanding what is the difference between COSTI and YMCA and Wood Green and Access and understanding from an immigrant's perspective what that trajectory and journey is. What does language training really entail? It was a lot more questions than I think the roundtable had anticipated that we were going to have to answer. But one of the best ways to overcome that was just having people at the table and having our strong settlement and service agency be like, no, that is not how it works. And so that was really, really helpful. And then having organizations like RBC who have done lots of private-public partnerships be able to tell KPMG, you can actually pull money out of this budget, and it can, align here. You can have your branding here, and this is, how you can build some of those private and public partnerships that are so important for funding. And for the service side, it was, having them at the table allowed them to really upfront be, we need, $12K to finish this initiative, and having KPMG be like, yeah, of course we can fund that. Yeah, we can find a way to fund that. Right, and it was having those very informal conversations versus, having to hunt down the right person at these huge organizations to get funding. It just would have never happened. So I think in terms of looking at smaller cities, it really is, having the leadership. So having either a champion. We were really fortunate to have Ratna, who, when she says jump, people usually do. But it's having some champion or group of champions who can really speak to the benefit of all coming together and sitting together, even if it's just doing it once, so people can meet each other and see a face to the name, and allow service and settlement agencies to talk about in very layman's terms. This is what we do. This is what the journey is like for a newcomer coming into this town or this city or this region, and having employers have a safe space to say, I don't know how to address this when I'm in the interview process and someone doesn't understand how I'm asking the question, or I don't understand how to cope with my current workforce being alienated by this new workforce. And being able to have some of those really frank discussions with employers, because a lot of them do really want to get engaged, and for the benefit of just their business, they need to. I mean, for LIUNA, it wasn't a question of whether they wanted to do it. I mean, they had to do it. They had severe labor shortages. But they also had the challenge of Canadian workforce being a bit alienated with having these newcomers come in. And so finding those innovative approaches, LIUNA started a rideshare program where they could have a Canadian and a newcomer carpool together because they were coming from the same area. And again, having those informal conversations, that newcomer's language acquisition and having a buddy on the workforce really improved their retention, their happiness in the workplace. So looking at those challenges, the solutions can be a lot easier if you have different perspectives around the table. If you have all one of the same, whether it's all settlement complaining about private sector because they're never engaged, or all private sector complaining about settlement because they're never available, it's just not helpful. It's great. I mean, we all like to vent, but it's important, I think, to have everyone at the table.
So I hear about education and building relationships so that employers feel comfortable calling someone, they know who to call.
Right. And again,
they're more informed, or they're more comfortable.
Yeah, having that face and knowing the person so you feel, again, a little bit more comfortable to call and say, this came up in a staff meeting today and I really don't know how to address it. I think we're really good and we're all guilty of wanting to have all the answers, but I think it's creating a space where people can say, I really don't know how to handle the situation. Yeah.
Okay, so this has been really great. There's quite a lot of information coming out, even just in the Q&A period, and I want to open it up to the audience. Just I'm going to take one more question. Let's have a rapid fire kind of question before going to the audience. Just wondering if you have any new ideas on your horizon. Some of you have talked about that already, or any kind of unexpected outcomes or surprises that you'd like to leave us with. So we'll start here with Christine and go down.
Sure. I think an unexpected outcome that we've seen through all of these different programs coming out of the legal network and beyond is that oftentimes streamlining services to create economic opportunities for immigrants, streamline services for everyone. And so when you think about creating a guide for how to open a business for immigrants, we found that it's not only immigrants that are downloading and using those guides, it's everyone, because city government websites are not always the most accessible or easily read. They don't always use the most plain English, period, and you need plain English to then translate into other languages. So there are some really amazing outcomes that come out from work that's targeted towards immigrants, but affects the whole community.
Okay, Deb.
So the roundtable's been relatively dormant for the last six months. So we're really excited tonight. We're announcing that we are kind of looking to revitalize the roundtable. We have a number of employers that are making big commitments tonight around hiring both refugees and vulnerable newcomers who are looking to enter the labor market. So if anyone in the room is interested in participating in that roundtable, all are welcome, whether you are can physically sit at the table or call into the meetings, or just want to contribute and engage in one way or another, please come in and speak with me. And we are looking to broaden it outside of the GTHA, because we do recognize that there are employers in Guelph that are really looking for immigrant talent, and how do we have settlement agencies here in the GTA understand where those opportunities are, so that they can also be transparent with newcomers when they're coming in, that there are opportunities outside of the city for those newcomers that are interested in looking at other city opportunities. So that's exciting. Please come and talk to me if you're interested in learning more or engaging.
Okay, Robin.
Okay. So we've included, we've launched a program called Game Changers at the Halifax Partnership, and it has 3 pillars, and of course the strongest, most well-known one is the Connector program. So we have 3 calls to businesses. 1 in Nova Scotia. 1 is to become a connector. 2 is to hire a recent grad. And 3, engage in experiential learning or work integrated learning. So it gave, because there was limited money for marketing, there wasn't for Game Changers. So what it did is really brought a lot of interest to back to the Connector program. So there's a waiting list of people that want to be part of the program. So yeah, we couldn't have done that without being part of this bigger package.
Right.
That's amazing. Great. Tamara?
I briefly mentioned in my presentation, but the sort of evolution of Business Out of the Box helped us create the recently launched Newcomer Entrepreneurship Hub and Women's Entrepreneurship Hub. We're really lucky because the Women's Entrepreneurship Hub is being funded for 3 years. Unfortunately, we're running into a challenge with the Newcomer Entrepreneurship Hub. Our funding is up March 31st, but we're hoping that we'll be able to keep it going. But the programs are sort of geared towards the different demographics, and so we try and tailor some of the learning in different languages and sort of appropriate to each person's circumstance. So it starts with 8 weeks of business training, and then they sort of build a business model campus, and then they move on to test their business temporarily. So it's a great program. We're still accepting people for our Women's Entrepreneurship Hub program, so if you know any women who might be interested, please do refer to them.
I will just thank you for a really great session. Thanks to Cities of Migration for hosting this event, which I think has been a really long time coming, and to Ryerson University for hosting us here. I will just close with a great quote from Steve Tabachman at Global Detroit, who is someone that many of us know and admire, and I think our speakers really brought this alive today. He said, "Asking the question of how a local economic development strategy can incorporate and benefit from the immigrants within the region, as well as future immigrants, can be a paradigm shift." So let's hope we're shifting paradigms today, and that this is the beginning of kind of a new phase of recognition and this new reality that we're living in. So thank you so much. And I don't know if Kim has any closing words. But
Oh, no, I just want to thank Christina Pope from Welcoming America, Robin Webb at the Halifax Partnership, Tamara Sabrini from Scatting Court, and Devin Franklin, Hire Immigrants at Magnet, and of course Sarah Wayland. That was did a great job with the Q&A. Thank you, everyone.